Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofermento, and you already know that when it comes to entrepreneurship, one thing that I so appreciate about entrepreneurs is that we are the builders of society. And lately, we have been coming across so many incredible entrepreneurs that not only are builders themselves, but are building things that help others build. And this is why I love all the ripple effects of entrepreneurship and what it makes possible. And I'm very excited to bring on and welcome to the show, and for all of us to learn from an incredible entrepreneur and guest who's doing exactly that, helping others build things that previously we could only dream of, especially people like maybe you and I, that we aren't as tech savvy. We don't know how to code. We don't know how to create these things. Well, let me introduce you to Mike Conway. Mike is an incredible entrepreneur. He's the founder and CEO of Arcodto, which is an early stage SaaS startup helping game developers plan, manage, and launch their games. With nearly 20 years of experience in tech, spanning everything from development to cloud architecture, Mike left the finance industry to build something of his own and support creativity in the gaming world. And why I talk about helping other people build things as well is because they are building, or they're creating a platform to help indie game developers build and launch a game, which is of course incredibly complex and requires skills across a variety of disciplines. So Arcodto helps break it down into manageable chunks while keeping focus on the big picture, which that's what we all need to face in our businesses. So I'm excited about this conversation. I'm not going to say anything else. Let's dive straight into my interview with Mike Conway. All right, Mike, I am so very excited that you're here with us today. First things first, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you very much for having me. Happy to be here.
Heck yeah. So I'm very excited. I think what you're building is so cool. We're at this really fun period in time where if we can dream it, if we can imagine it, we can start to build it thanks to amazing entrepreneurs like you, Mike. So before we start jumping into all that good stuff, take us beyond the bio. Who's Mike? How'd you start doing all these cool things?
Yeah, well, I didn't really know what I wanted to be when I grew up early on, right? You know, going to college, trying to figure out, the world in front of me. I was actually going to be an English teacher of all things, or maybe a writer. I was going to major in English, and, that just didn't pan out. So, I was actually just working at a retail chain at the time, trying to figure out where I wanted to go. And it was actually my mom. She's like, "You've always been really good with computers. Why don't you go to this tech school and, see if you can, do something there?" I'm like, "Well, maybe." So, one day I just got tired of dealing with the public, just took a day off, drove up to the school, just walked around, talked to them to kind of see what it was all about. And, they took me around, gave me a tour, said, if you go into this field, you'll be able to do this and that. And I'm like, yeah, that's what I want to do. That sounds really cool. So started doing that while working full time, got a job at a tech company about 45 minutes away. And yeah, just learned so much just from, being on the job, talking to really, really brilliant people, and just kind of picking up whatever I could as I could. And, the rest is history. I've been in the industry about 20 years, done development, I've done cloud architecture, I've done security, I've done just all kinds of cool stuff, and feel really lucky to get to work in an industry as dynamic and evolving as the one that I do. So, yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, I love that overview, Mike, but I'm going to call out, there's a big difference between somebody who finds their feet in the tech world, obviously gains as many skills as you do. There's a big difference between people who just do that, but then someone who just says, there's this entrepreneurial calling inside of me. I want to leverage these skills, not for a 9-to-5 job. I want to go out on my own and build something. So take us to those entrepreneurial aspirations that you very clearly acted on.
Yeah, of course. I've always kind of wanted to do my own thing. Like I said, I've done this for a long time, and working in the tech world is chaotic. You're on call all the time. Bad things happen. You know how computers are. Things go south all the time when you least expect it to. And I just wanted to build something. That's the cool thing about like the development aspect, especially, right? It's like adult Legos. You can take all of these pieces you're given in the form of like a programming language and cloud components you can put together to build something really cool. And like I said, I've done this for a long time, and I joke I've spent a lot of hours of my life making other people rich, right? building their dream, helping to, bring something from the ground up. And I kind of wanted to do it for myself. I felt like that was going to be really rewarding and kind of cool to see.
Yeah, for sure. And you're obviously preaching to the choir here in front of the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur audience. It's something that we all dream of, but the fact that you've taken such massive action, I want to congratulate you. Earlier this year, you actually left your full-time job. You are a full-time entrepreneur building Arcodto, which it's so cool what you're doing there. I would imagine that when you looked at the landscape of all the things you could do, you probably came up with a lot of ideas, because you talk about making other people rich. There's so many different ways that your skill set can be leveraged and can be used in very valuable ways. What was that landscape of ideas that you were considering? How did you eventually settle on Arcodto?
Yeah, that is a journey for sure. Arcodto is probably iteration 8 or 9 in terms of ideas, because I knew I was a hard worker. I was willing to put in the time. I enjoyed, writing code, building stuff, but you have to have an idea that's scalable and, monetizable, right? Before you can go out and build a business. And I've done all kinds of stuff. I was going to build some software that was going to help. I don't know, like I always enjoyed like paintball when I was a kid, like going out. That's where I made a lot of my friends, like in high school, but that's kind of like fallen to the wayside, especially in light of COVID. All kinds of different industries, hospitality, like these things that I dabbled in that I thought sounded interesting, but just didn't really scale well. But I kind of settled on video games because growing up, that was kind of my sanctuary. I grew up kind of on a farm in the middle of nowhere, so there weren't a lot of other kids around to talk to or hang out with. So that was kind of my escape to, do something and enjoy myself. So the coolest thing about the video game industry now is, back in the day, if you wanted to, create a game, you had to go work for a game studio, right? But now, all these game engines, you can just go download them, write code, and just create a game like in your own living room. And, they have, stores like Steam and so forth where you can self-publish and promote and put it out there and do it all yourself. And that's really cool because, like I said earlier, I wanted to be like maybe a writer because I've always enjoyed like the creative aspect of that and the storytelling and, but I'm also really interested in technology. So I think that, creating a game is kind of like the perfect intersection of the two, right? Being able to like take a story and then like bring it to life using the technology that's available to you.
Yeah, so well said. And Mike, similar to you, I mean, when I grew up, I loved playing video games. And I think so many of us, especially certain generations, like our parents' generation, maybe they didn't grow up playing video games as much as we did, but we all had consoles. We all really enjoyed, whether it's getting together with our friends, or we also, for the first time ever, we got to see the advent of online gaming, which was this new thing that I could be sitting in my house alone in my parents' basement, obviously, and interacting with people all over the world. It's a really cool social component to what it means these days to be in the video gaming world. And I think about all the ramifications of video games. The media likes to talk about some of the negative ones. I like to talk about the positive ones. I mean, as a young kid, I loved soccer. So I ended up playing a lot of soccer video games. And Mike, here I was at 12 years old negotiating contracts with players and balancing a budget and setting strategy and tactics, all of course in a video game, not in real life. I was 12 years old. And so that taught me so many valuable life skills. I've personally talked to so many people who have had these types of ideas for games where they're just like, I wish I could create a game where a kid could do this or a kid could learn that. And Mike, historically, none of us are video game creators and most of us are not developers. We don't know how to do that. How's Arcodto opening up those doors for us? Because we do live in a world where things are at our fingertips more than ever before. We can code things more than we've ever been able to, even if we have no idea what we're doing, thanks to AI. So talk to us about where Arcodto fits into this equation.
Yeah, creating a video game is super hard. I talk about it in the starry-eyed sense of, oh, you can just go out and build it, right? But there really is so much that goes into it. Even speaking as someone who's worked in the software industry for so long, it's even so different from that, just because you're not just sitting down and writing code. You have to be an artist. You have to create music or, hire someone to create music for you if you're not a composer. Just like all these things that fit together, the mechanics, the play testing, like, the promotion, like it's a whole business all just in itself. And when you sit down to try to put something like that together, it's just overwhelming. I speak as, I call myself a wannabe game developer. I work on some games here on the side here or there just for myself, but there's just so much to think about and so much that goes into it. And I was trying to use, traditional software planning tools or project management tools, and a lot of them are very rigid, right? They're a lot of them are built for corporations or places that have a very rigid structure, and they want to have their time reporting and everything all planned out in one nice, neat timeline. And the reality is that game development just doesn't work that way. Generally you start with kind of this core idea, and then you start branching out from there. And more than likely it's going to change quite a bit over its life cycle. And then you'll go hand it to somebody else and say, here, go play test this for me, and let me know what you think, or let me watch you. And then you'll find all these other things that you never really thought about, or maybe you'll discover some direction that you should have gone in rather than this other approach that you took. So it's a very nebulous, evolving process. You can't really sit down and plan a game from A to B and expect to be successful. So what Arcodto is doing is kind of helping break that down for folks. So starting with this core idea and then allowing you to build out all of the pieces that you need, all your mechanics, all your characters, all of your level, all the things that go into a game like you would expect. And then being able to break that down into small tasks that you can, take on bit by bit, and then, iterate on as you kind of watch your game come to life. So doing it in small pieces like that is a lot less overwhelming than, trying to sit down and plan it all from start to finish. So as I was doing it myself, I used several tools that were on the market, and none of them really fit. And I'm like, well, I could go build my own. And so that's what I started doing, and it kind of evolved from there.
Yeah, I love that. Hearing you talk about that, you're right. I don't think a lot of us consider all the complexities and considerations that go into making a video game. Hearing the way you talk about it takes me back to childhood, where me and my older brother and my younger sister would fire up Grand Theft Auto and just go as far out into the ocean as we can on a boat and see what happens at the edge of the playable map. And someone at Rockstar Games had to think of that scenario. They had to think of all these different contingencies, which I would imagine that in today's day and age, we have tools like AI that can help us do that. How much is AI playing into things behind the scenes at Arcodto? Because it is doing a lot of that heavy lifting and maybe contingency planning and considerations that we just may not think of, because we got to think about characters and storyline and so many other things that go into it. So how's AI playing a role there?
Yeah, AI is certainly helpful. You got to be careful with AI just because everyone's really excited about it. It's the new big thing in the industry. And so, all of these corporations and companies, they have to have an AI strategy, right? And, I always think that's the wrong approach. AI is a tool, just like, a hammer is a tool. It's built for a very specific purpose. So before you go, chasing an AI strategy, you need to figure out what problem you're trying to solve first, right? So for me specifically, AI is super helpful in coding. I don't know how many countless nights I've spent, trying to debug this one line of code that just doesn't work for reasons I can't understand. And you have essentially a coding buddy, right at your fingertips now, where you can just drop that in and say, hey, this doesn't work, and I'm getting this exception. Can you help me figure out what's going on? And it'll kind of work alongside you to do that. Whereas, before it was just hours and hours of Googling and hoping somebody on Stack Overflow had the same problem as you. But from the product side, it's one of the things that AI is really, really good at is summarizing information, right? So, as you're building all these individual pieces, a game can sprawl pretty quickly, but you need to be able to find, the specific thing that you're looking for. So AI is kind of used behind the scenes to go out and find, if you're going to go search for something, an idea that you had 2 months ago when you were initially building out the game, it can help you do that. And also summarize a lot of it. A lot of people like to produce what they call a game design doc, which is basically the blueprint of what your game's going to look like that defines the scope and everything in it. So AI can help summarize that, all your stuff as well, and kind of compile it into one nice, neat little package for you.
Yeah, it's so cool always hearing behind the scenes of people who are building tech companies, because you talk about those countless nights. But Mike, I'll be honest with you, where my entrepreneurial mind goes is that countless nights coding, that's only one small fraction of what you as the founder of your company need to do. And I want to call something out. I love that you wrote this on your LinkedIn. You wrote, after nearly 2 decades in the technology industry, building a SaaS is a brand new challenge. And here's the part that I especially want to call out. You wrote, it's going to be hard, and it's going to be scary, but it's also going to be awesome. And I so appreciate that. As 17 plus years into my own entrepreneurial journey, you're right. It's definitely not the easiest path, but it just seems to me from the outside looking in at all the different things that you're doing, the way you show up on LinkedIn, the way on your website, it's clearly so strategic and intentional about the way that you're rolling Arcoddo out. You're building a community around it. You're making sure that early users are a big part of the stuff that you're building. That's not just programming. You're not just focusing on the tech aspect of your business. Zoom out and talk to us about the entire entrepreneurial experience, because it's so much more than just you being a practitioner of the skills that you've built over your professional career up to this point.
Yeah, it really is. And it is scary, I mean, most awesome things start out scary, right? And that's one thing I kind of learned from working in, I spent 10 years in the payments industry. And that was really eye-opening for me, because we were creating these platforms where people could process payments. We could compete with like the likes of Stripe, PayPal, ones you're probably familiar with. On a much smaller scale, of course. But people would bring along their own software, and they would integrate to our platform so they could process payments for their customers or process their monthly subscriptions or whatever they were charging for, right? And I would look at some of these products that people would bring along, and I'm like, oh, that looks terrible. It looks like it was written in like 1990. But sure enough, they would come along, they would integrate, and I'd notice like a month later they were making tens of millions of dollars, and I'm like, wow, like, well, if they can do it, I can do it too. It doesn't have to be beautiful as long as it's it's solving a problem for somebody. I always joke, it's amazing what people will pay money for. And, it sounds kind of mean at face value, but I mean, the truth is, if you're legitimately solving a problem for someone, they don't care what it looks like. They don't care about the marketing and all that. They just care about solving a problem in their day-to-day life. And, just helping so many people integrate and kind of watching their journey, as they launched their own software startups and, got to the point where they were talking to us and processing payments and getting ready to launch. That was really inspiring to me. So, definitely learned a lot just from talking to those people. And I am an introvert. I am not a people person. So, like learning to do those things was really challenging for me, like learning about marketing, like what does that really mean? A lot of the stuff that I've built in the past is really utilitarian, right? Like I'm not a UI guy. Like it's very functional, but it's usually not very pretty. So, trying to build a product that is, presentable and useful to people and has a good user experience was a journey. And all the other stuff, that goes into it as well, like learning how to keep books, how to do finances, how to, register your business, all these things that go on behind the scenes that aren't necessarily the sexy part, but are very, very critical to your success. Trying to learn all that once was definitely an adventure, and I'm still learning every day, of course, but it's, like I said, it's challenging, but it's awesome.
Yeah, I feel like you just presented to us in that one answer both sides of the entrepreneurial coin. One side of that coin is the fact that we're strategic and we're very intentional. I mean, you alluded to the fact that you gained so much from past experiences that have helped you in your entrepreneurial journey up to this point. But at the same time, it sounds like you have that open recognition of what people point their fingers at entrepreneur, and they always say, oh, entrepreneurs, they jump off the cliff and they build the parachute on the way down. And it's so true, because we're always taking these twists and turns. Mike, talk to us about that balancing act, because I would imagine that when you did sit down, especially leaving your full-time job, that's a massive decision. I would imagine that you were super strategic and super intentional about what the roadmap is. And obviously, as a developer, I love on your website, you even publicize your roadmap. Hey, here's the thing. So that is very strategic and intentional thinking on a realistic timeline. But at the same time, you are figuring things out day to day. We all are in all of our businesses. What does that balancing act look like? How have things aligned with that plan? And then how adaptable have you had to be up to this point?
Oh, it hasn't aligned at all. Like I said, there's always curveballs. There's always things that come up that you didn't expect. you'll create this thing and feel really good about it and realize that either like, oh, it doesn't really fit, 6 months later when you've made it a little bit further along. And I think the key to it is just talking to people, engaging with your community, engaging with your users. I've interviewed folks on YouTube who do game development tutorials, and at first I was really nervous about it, right? Like I'm like, oh, I'm bothering these people. But what I found is that a lot of these people are, they take a lot of pride in their work. And if someone expresses an interest in that and wants to talk to them about something they're obviously passionate about, they're more than willing to do so. Talking to people out there in the world who are building video games and trying to get a feel for what they do. There's so many ways that people sit down and try to plan something like this, and trying to get a feel for how their mind works is super important to make sure you're building something that people actually want. So I think talking to people really is just the core of it, which I said before is difficult for me. I'm your stereotypical engineer that would rather put on your headphones and code for 20 hours a day, but that's just not how it works in the business world. You got to get out there, you got to talk to people and learn from them.
All right, Mike, then you're calling a lot of us entrepreneurs out there because you talk about wanting to code for 20 hours a day. Honestly, most time periods in my life, the number one thing that I want to be doing is working, because I'm so passionate about all the things that I'm doing, all the things that I'm building, all the possibilities that are out there. That's something that unites all of us entrepreneurs, is how passionate we are, how delusional we are about what can be done and in what amount of time. So let's go there, because I would imagine that your mind is constantly running with all of these ideas, and you're a hustler. You have a very large willingness to work. So how are you balancing the life side of the equation with what it is that you're trying to build at Arcodto at the same time?
Yeah, definitely an adjustment for sure. I get very, very focused and very excited whenever I'm doing these things. And sometimes it is kind of hard to pull yourself away from it. I started gaining weight, right? Because I was sitting in front of a computer all day and ordering food from food delivery services, right? Like, finding the time to step away is super important. Spend time with my significant other, read, get outside, go work out, because if you don't take care of your body, it's going to take care of itself, and you're not going to have a say in it. You get burned out, you get tired, you get exhausted, you get cranky, and you don't do your best work. So I think that's probably the biggest struggle that I've dealt with, is trying to figure out, okay, I have this finite amount of time, and if I work through, those 3 extra hours, maybe I can launch, I don't know, a day earlier. But the truth is, you got to plan it out, and you have to be very intentional with your time and say, okay, I'm going to do this thing, and then I'm going to walk away and refresh myself a little bit so I can come back better.
Yeah, one analogy that I heard very early on in my entrepreneurial journey is that for certain things, we're disciplined enough, and it's not even a question of time. It's just a given in our days. For example, at least twice a day, we're going to brush our teeth. We never have problems finding the time to do those things because they're built-in parts of our day. And it's wise advice that I got very early on, is that we need to have that same level of discipline for the important things. You called it out: working out, spending time with our significant others, just mental clarity time. It gives us that space and fresh perspective in order to do meaningful work. So I love the fact that you've called both those things out. And it sounds to me like you just have such a grounded, realistic approach to these things. And I find this, Mike, and a lot of people with technical skills such as yourself, is that you do see the world through the lens of, hey, if I do this, then I do that. Obviously, very programming logic at the root of that. And obviously, so much of that comes from the structure of your career. Even before you sat down to start Arcodto, I would imagine that you always thrived in somewhat structured environments. How are you bringing those past experiences into your entrepreneurial journey? What are the things from your jobs that you look back on and you say, I actually like that, I want to keep that, I want to adhere to that even in my own business, versus the things that you said, no, I didn't care for that, I want to do things totally differently as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, well, I'm glad that's the perception, because my inner mind is super chaotic. I hope what comes out the other side is, at least somewhat structured, but, I'm sure that's the case for everybody. Your mind's always churning in a million directions at once, and it's kind of hard to, get excited about one thing in particular and stick with it, at least for me. But, I think the biggest piece is, I'm bootstrapping this startup. Like the companies I've worked for before were mostly VC backed, and it's a very viable avenue for people with some very specific goals. But the truth of it is, like when you go that route, the goal is to get in, make money really quickly, and grow, right? And that's not really my focus. Obviously, everyone wants to make money in their business, but for me, this is something that I actually really enjoy. And I've spent a lot of years, grinding and just going 100 miles an hour trying to grow businesses at breakneck speed and make money like that. And what I really appreciate about this opportunity is, I'm the only stakeholder that I have to appease, right? Like I can build it correctly. If I want to take an extra month and, make sure this is polished and it launches and it's successful versus throwing out there that's kind of something out there that's kind of gross and, iterating it out over time. I can do that. And I really appreciate that, being able to kind of do it my own way and take all those things that I learned, but do it in a way that makes sense for me versus trying to appease, an army of shareholders out there somewhere. It's a really nice change of pace, and it gives me a lot of pride in what I'm building. So I definitely appreciate that I'm lucky enough to have the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, so well said. I love the fact that you pointed out that we don't have stakeholders. We are beholden only to ourselves in this, and obviously the people that we want to serve. And that's ultimately why we hold ourselves to such a high standard, is because we want to put amazing things out into the world that help other people. And so with that said, I love the fact that personal responsibility, that is such a driving force for you. And that means that you think big. It means that you execute big. It means all of those things. Mike, I knew that time would fly by with you, but I want to squeeze in two more questions actually with you. The first is just hearing the way you think. I resonate so much with you talking about the chaos inside of your mind, but then obviously you have to organize it so that you can actually tackle things in a meaningful and practical way. What are some of your personal, I guess I'll ask the question in terms of either personal tools, personal strategies, personal tactics. What are some of the things that you utilize personally to stay organized, to stay on track, to make sure that you're moving in the right direction of what it is that you want?
Honestly, there's quite a few. The biggest thing to me, I think, that has been helpful is time blocking your calendar, because time is always the one resource nobody has enough of, right? When you're sitting down in the morning with your coffee, you're thinking of all these things you could accomplish during the day. The reality is most of the time things are going to take longer than you expect them to. So being able to sit down and look at a calendar in the morning, I actually do this every morning. I get up, I make a cup of coffee, and I sit down on the couch with my laptop, and I think, what do I want to do today? And then I'll think about each piece, how long it's going to take, and I'll stick it on my calendar. And what ends up happening is you realize, well, you don't have as much time as you think you do. So being able to do that and be intentional with your time and actually accomplish the things you set out to do versus, having a to-do list that's a mile long and only accomplishing half of it and going to bed feeling bad about yourself. To me, that's made a really big difference.
Yeah, I love that. Oof. All right. Well, then I'm going to have to revisit my to-do list. I've always loved that notion of we often overestimate what we can do in a day or a week, but we underestimate what we can do in a month or a quarter or a year. And I think it's just something that we all have to experience that. We all do have to pile up that to-do list before we realize all of these things that you're sharing with us. So I so appreciate those insights. I'm going to put you on the spot one last time. It's the only question that I ask that's the same in every single interview. And Mike, that is, what's your best advice for listeners, knowing that we're being listened to by both wantrepreneurs and entrepreneurs at all different stages of their own growth journeys, and also knowing that you are one of us out there absolutely taking action and making moves. So with that entrepreneurial hat on, what's that piece of advice that you want to leave listeners with?
Ooh, it's a good question. I think ultimately it comes down to the fact that the bar is lower than you probably think. It's easy to dwell on your own skill gaps or your lack of knowledge in a certain area. But the truth is, no one really knows what they're doing. We're out there just doing our best, figuring it out as we go. I made the joke earlier, like, it's amazing what people will pay for. Even an ugly product can succeed if it's truly solving a problem for someone. And so my advice would be to have some confidence in yourself. And as long as you're focused on solving problems for people, the rest will kind of naturally come along with it.
Oh, Mike, it's hard for guests to come on here, and me as someone who's done almost 1,300 episodes on this show, it's hard for a guest to come on and give a fresh piece of advice that I haven't heard before, but I love the way you articulated that. The bar is so much lower than most of us realize. We look at kind of companies that we put on a pedestal and we think, oh, their branding is so perfect, their UI, their UX, everything is so perfect. How the heck am I going to compete with that? But we don't have to compete with that. When we talk about video games, none of us need to aspire to be Rockstar Games. There's a million other, probably more than a million other indie developers that we can far outcompete, that we can deliver so much better on. And so, yeah, actually, that's shockingly, and maybe not the intuitive response to it, but the fact that the bar is low is inspiring to us. And I love the way that you've pointed that out, and really how that has enabled you personally to embrace imperfect action. Because Mike, you're not talking about these things in theory, you are making moves, and I so appreciate that about you. So I'm very excited for listeners to also go ahead and check out Arcodto. So drop some links on us. Where should listeners go from here if they want to find Arcodto, if they want to reach out to you directly? I'd love for you to tell them where they should go.
Yeah, of course. Best place to go is probably arcodto.com. That's ARCODO. All the roadmap information, product information is there. We're building a community of folks who are going to be beta testers. So if you are a game developer and you want to take it for a test drive and tell me what you think, there's a form on there where you can sign up. And then, like I said, we're building a community. So there's links on there to our subreddit, to our Discord, if you want to get in there and talk to me and tell me what you think would work for you, or what would be helpful in your own game development journey. I'm all ears. Would love to hear it. So definitely appreciate it.
Yes, and listeners, you already know the drill. We're dropping that link directly down below in the show notes, no matter where it is that you're tuning into today's episode. So if you're on the go, if you're driving, don't worry about remembering the Arcodto link. You can click right on through from this episode show notes. We're also linking to Mike's personal LinkedIn. So he's always putting out awesome content there. I personally love checking out his LinkedIn, and he just shares not only on the Arcodto front, but Mike is very transparent about sharing his entrepreneurial thoughts and his excitement about it, because it obviously comes from his passion. So if you want to follow a great entrepreneur, if you want to partner with him, reach out, have a conversation. Don't be shy. There's a lot of Mike Conways on LinkedIn, so we're linking to his direct LinkedIn. You can find him there from the show notes. Otherwise, Mike, on behalf of myself and all the listeners worldwide, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was great.